The salt flats blurred white, then black, then nothing at all. I woke up in a stranger's truck. Her jacket draped over me. "You almost died out there," she said, voice sharp and shaking. I didn't know her name. I already knew her eyes. 3 weeks later, she kissed me under a full moon. Then my fiancé's sister recognized her face in an old photo. The woman who saved my life was hiding a secret, one that would tear my family apart before it healed us. My name is Dana Whitfield, 29 years old, an accountant from Sacramento who spent every free weekend chasing empty highways and forgetting who I was supposed to be. That August, I drove alone to the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, chasing silence. And instead I found the person who would rewrite the rest of my life. The heat hit 104 degrees that afternoon, and I underestimated how fast the desert could turn on a person. I remember white salt stretching to the horizon, my water bottle empty, my legs suddenly refusing to hold me up. Then darkness. And the next thing I felt was cool air and someone's hands pressing firmly against my collarbone. "Stay with me," she said, tilting my chin, checking my pulse like she'd done this 100 times before. Her name was Jordan Hale, a park ranger and volunteer EMT station near the flats every summer season. She drove me 20 miles to the nearest station, one hand on the wheel, one eye constantly checking my breathing. I woke up in a cot with an 4 in my arm and Jordan sitting beside me, still wearing her uniform. "You're lucky," she said, not unkindly. "People die out there thinking they're invincible. You clearly aren't." I laughed weakly and told her I was starting to realize that, in more ways than the desert. She smiled for the first time then, and something in my chest shifted, quiet and unfamiliar. I stayed in town longer than planned, telling myself it was for recovery, not for the woman checking on me daily. Jordan brought me black coffee every morning before her shift, always with the same crooked, half-apologetic smile. We talked about nothing important at first: hiking trails, bad diner food, the strange beauty of empty places. Slowly the conversations turned personal. Her father's ranch, my job I hated, the engagement ring I still wore. I noticed I twisted that ring whenever she looked at me too long, like it was a rope holding me down. One evening she took me to watch the sunset paint the salt flats pink, and I forgot to check my phone. "You don't talk about your fiancé much," she said carefully, watching the horizon instead of my face. "There's not much to say," I admitted, surprised by how easily the truth slipped out around her. I had been engaged to Marcus for 18 months, comfortable, safe, and quietly, devastatingly wrong for years. Jordan never pushed. She just listened, the way someone listens when they already suspect the ending. We started texting after I finally drove home, small messages that slowly turned into hour-long calls at midnight. I told my best friend Priya about her. Careful with pronouns, careful with everything, still afraid of my own words. "You sound different when you talk about her," Priya said. "Happier, lighter, also terrified." I didn't argue, because she was right about all three, and I hated how obvious it had become. 6 weeks after the desert, I flew back to Utah for what I called, unconvincingly, a weekend trip. Jordan picked me up from the airport wearing a plain flannel shirt, and I forgot how to speak for a second. We hiked at dawn before the heat rose, and she held my hand over loose gravel like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was the first time a woman's hand in mine had ever felt like coming home. That night, sitting on her porch, she asked if I'd ever loved someone I couldn't explain to my family. I said no. Then immediately understood that I was lying to both of us at the same time. "I think I might be falling for you," Jordan said quietly, not looking at me, bracing for rejection. I didn't answer with words. I answered by finally taking off the ring and setting it on the railing. We didn't kiss that night. We just sat there, hands touching, letting the fear settle into something like hope. I flew home to Sacramento with my chest full of something I hadn't felt in years, certainty. I called Marcus the next evening and told him I couldn't marry him, without fully explaining why yet. He didn't fight it much. Somewhere. He'd probably known our engagement was a slow, polite kind of drowning. I told my mother I'd ended things, and she asked if there was someone else. Her voice already suspicious. I said no. Another lie. Small and cowardly. The kind that buys time but never actually protects anyone. Jordan and I kept talking every night. Our calls stretching longer. Our silences growing more comfortable than words. In October, she flew to Sacramento for the first time, and I met her at the gate like a teenager. She hugged me right there in public, and I felt every old fear rise up and then, surprisingly, settle down. We spent 4 days together, and by the end I knew this wasn't a summer fling born from a fainting spell. On her last night, under the string lights on my apartment balcony, she finally kissed me. It was soft, unhurried, and it answered every question I'd been too afraid to ask myself for years. I've wanted to do that since the Salt Flats, she admitted, laughing at herself, cheeks flushed red. Why didn't you? I asked. You looked half dead and terrified, she said. Bad timing. Even for me. We laughed until it turned into something quieter. Foreheads pressed together. Both of us finally admitting the truth. After she flew home, I sat with the word girlfriend in my head, testing its shape, its weight, its danger. I hadn't said it out loud to anyone yet. Not even Priya, who already knew everything except the label. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was choosing my own story instead of following one. By November we were video calling every night, mapping out visits like two people quietly building a shared calendar. Jordan met Priya over a grainy video call, and the two of them ganged up on me within minutes. She's exactly your type, Priya texted afterward. Steady. Unbothered. The opposite of Marcus in every possible way. I started noticing small things, how Jordan always said we about future plans. Easy and certain. Never hesitant. She told me about her mother, who died when Jordan was 17, and how the ranch still smelled like her. I told her about the version of myself I'd buried since college, the one who liked girls and hid it well. When did you know? She asked gently. And I realized no one had ever asked me that so kindly before. 19, I admitted. I just decided it was easier to date men and call the ache something else. Jordan didn't flinch or pity me. She just reached over and laced her fingers through mine, steady and sure. For the first time, I felt like my past made sense instead of feeling like something shameful to outrun. My mother invited me to Thanksgiving and asked, pointedly, if I was bringing someone this year. I said yes. Then spent 3 sleepless nights rehearsing sentences that all sounded wrong out loud. Jordan offered to stay home instead, worried about putting me in an impossible position with my family. I don't want to hide you, I told her, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in years. We drove into my parents' driveway in Sacramento, and I felt my stomach drop somewhere near my knees. My mother opened the door, saw 2 women standing together, and her smile flickered before it steadied. Dinner started polite and stiff. My father asking Jordan generic questions about her job at the park. My younger brother Kyle kept glancing between us, putting pieces together faster than the adults at the table. Then my mother asked, too casually, so how exactly do you two know each other? I opened my mouth to explain the desert, the fainting, the rescue, and something else entirely came out instead. Jordan's my girlfriend, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, the words finally landing where they belonged. The table went silent except for the clink of a fork my father set down too carefully. My mother excused herself to the kitchen, and I followed, my heart pounding louder than the conversation. I raised you for a different life, she said quietly, not looking at me, gripping the counter's edge. You didn't raise me for a life, I said. You raised me for a version of one you understood. She didn't yell. She just went quiet in a way that felt worse than any shouting match ever could. We left early that night, and Jordan held my hand the entire silent drive back to the hotel. I'm sorry, I whispered in the dark. Don't be sorry for telling the truth, she answered, pulling me closer. My mother didn't call for 2 weeks, and every unanswered message felt like another small, deliberate door closing. Meanwhile, my company announced a promotion to regional director, contingent on relocating to Denver within 6 months. It was everything I'd worked for professionally, and it would put 400 miles between Jordan and me. I didn't tell her at first, terrified that choosing my career would look like choosing it over her. When she found out from an offhand comment, her face closed in a way I hadn't seen before. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked. Or was I supposed to find out after you'd already decided? I had no good answer. Only excuses. And excuses had never once fixed anything between two honest people. We fought for the first time. Quietly but painfully. Both of us saying things meant to wound, not to heal. Maybe you're still not ready for this, Jordan said. Maybe you never left that ring behind at all. The words landed harder than she probably intended, because some small, cowardly part of me knew they weren't wrong. I flew home to Sacramento without resolving anything, the distance between us suddenly feeling larger than 400 miles. My mother finally called, not to apologize, but to ask if I'd reconsider keeping things quieter going forward. I realized then that my mother and my own fear were asking me for the exact same thing. Priya sat me down and asked bluntly if I was more afraid of losing Jordan or of being seen. I didn't have an answer that night. Only the uncomfortable certainty that both fears were tangled together tightly. For a week, Jordan and I barely spoke, our calls shrinking to short, careful, exhausted check-ins. I turned down the Denver promotion, then immediately panicked, wondering if I just sabotaged my career for uncertainty. My manager, surprise, asked if everything was okay, and I said I was choosing my life, not just my title. I called Jordan and told her about the decision, bracing myself for relief that somehow didn't fully arrive. I don't want you to give things up for me, she said. I want you to stop giving yourself up. Her words cracked something open in me that had been sealed shut since long before I met her. We agreed to slow down, not to end things, but to figure out who we each were becoming, separately and together. In December, my mother called again, her voice unusually gentle, asking if we could talk in person, alone. I drove to her house expecting another argument and instead found her sitting at the table with old photographs. She slid one across to me, herself at 23, standing close to a woman I'd never heard of before. Her name was Renee, my mother said quietly. We were inseparable. Before I chose what was easier, I stared at the photo, stunned, realizing the fear I'd inherited had a long, hidden history of its own. I told myself I was protecting you from a hard life, she said. I think I was protecting myself. For the first time, my mother cried in front of me, decades of silence finally breaking loose at once. We didn't fix everything that afternoon, but something between us shifted, cracked open toward a fragile kind of honesty. I told Jordan about the conversation that night, and she went quiet, absorbing how much history had shaped our fight. That explains so much, she said softly. Doesn't excuse it, but explains it. I'm glad she finally told you. Slowly, cautiously, we started rebuilding what the argument had shaken, one honest conversation at a time. In January, Jordan surprised me with a transfer request to a ranger position near Sacramento, closer to me. I'm not asking you to promise forever, she said. I'm asking to stop measuring us in miles. I cried harder than I expected, overwhelmed that she'd choose closeness after everything we'd almost lost. Just as things steadied, Marcus reappeared, calling to say he'd heard rumors and wanted closure. His word, not mine. We met for coffee. And he asked if I'd been like this the whole time we were engaged. I didn't have the words for it then, I admitted. I do now. And I'm sorry it took this long. He left more confused than angry, and I left feeling lighter. Another piece of old armor finally set down. Then, unexpectedly, my father called, asking to meet me alone. His voice tight and unusually formal. We sat in his truck outside a diner, and he admitted he'd known about Renee for years. Silently. I let your mother bury that part of herself, he said. I don't want you burying yours too. It was the closest thing to an apology, and an invitation, that my father had ever offered me. Jordan's transfer finally cleared in February, and she moved into a small apartment 15 minutes from mine. We spent weekends slowly merging our lives, bookshelves, coffee mugs. The easy rhythm of two people choosing each other daily. My mother invited us both to Sunday dinner, and this time she hugged Jordan first. Briefly but genuinely. Kyle joked that Jordan was clearly the calmer influence in the family, and even my father laughed at that. For the first time, holidays felt less like performances and more like something resembling an actual, honest family. We celebrated our 1-year anniversary of the desert rescue quietly, just the two of us. Back at the salt flats, standing where I'd collapse. Jordan told me she'd almost changed her ranger route that week for no real reason. Some part of me was already looking for you before I even knew your name, she admitted, half embarrassed. Then, in March, Jordan's own family entered the picture. Her father, a rancher, arrived unannounced from Idaho. He hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, uncomfortable with her identity, her choices, the life she'd built without him. I'm dying, he told her flatly. Stage 4. I didn't want to leave things the way they were. Jordan went pale, gripping the door frame. Years of hurt and longing colliding in a single devastating sentence. I stayed close but quiet, letting her decide how much space this reunion deserved after so much silence. Over the following weeks, Jordan flew back and forth to Idaho, sitting with the father running out of time. She came home from each visit thinner, quieter, carrying grief she hadn't let herself feel in years. He apologized, she told me one night. 3 years too late. But he finally said the words. I held her while she cried, understanding now that our whole relationship existed inside other people's slow, painful growth. In April, her father passed away, and Jordan asked me to come to Idaho for the funeral with her. Standing beside her at the graveside, I finally understood the full weight of everything she'd carried since the desert. Extended relatives whispered about the roommate, but Jordan, red-eyed and unwilling to hide anymore, corrected them plainly. This is Dana, she said. My partner. Not my roommate. He knew that. The end. And made peace with it. An aunt pulled Jordan aside afterward and quietly said her father had kept a photo of the two of us. He never showed it to anyone, the aunt admitted, but he carried it folded in his wallet the whole time. Jordan broke down completely then. Grief and relief tangled together in a way neither of us could untangle that day. After the funeral, Jordan withdrew for weeks, grief settling over her like the heavy, silent salt flat air. I gave her space, but I also worried the distance from the summer fight was quietly returning between us. One night she finally spoke. I keep thinking about how close I came to losing my father without truth. I don't want us to end up like that, she said. I don't want to run out of time for honesty. She told me she'd inherited the ranch, unexpectedly, and had to decide whether to sell it or return to Idaho. The idea of her leaving terrified me more than any argument we'd ever had, but I stayed quiet, listening. Come with me, she said suddenly. Not forever necessarily, just to see if it could be ours together. It was the biggest ask either of us had made, and it forced every fear I still carried into the open. I thought about my job, my mother's slow healing, The life I'd finally built somewhat honestly in Sacramento. Then I thought about the salt flats. How close I'd come to disappearing before any of this ever began. My mother, surprisingly, encouraged me. Don't spend your life almost choosing things, she said. I did that once. I gave notice at my job, both terrified and strangely calm, like I was finally catching up to myself. 2 weeks before the move, Jordan's ex-girlfriend Cass resurfaced, claiming a legal stake in part of the ranch land. It was an old dispute from before I knew her, ugly and complicated, threatening the fragile plans we'd just made. Jordan panicked, afraid the past would collapse everything we'd rebuilt since her father's death and my own family's healing. I should have told you about this months ago, she admitted. I was scared you'd think less of me. I told her honestly what scared me more was secrets, not the mess itself. And we finally faced it together. We hired a local lawyer, spent stressful weeks in mediation, and slowly untangled the dispute through documentation and patience. Cass eventually settled for a fair buyout, admitting she'd mostly wanted acknowledgement, not actually the land itself. The ordeal, though painful, taught us something crucial. We could survive a crisis without secrets pulling us apart anymore. Right after the settlement, Jordan's aunt called to say she'd found a second, unopened letter among her father's things. It was addressed to Jordan, written the week before he died, sealed and never delivered by mistake. We sat together on the porch as Jordan opened it, her hands trembling more than they had at the funeral. Inside, her father had written that he wished he'd met me sooner, and that he was proud of who she'd become. Jordan read it twice, then folded it carefully and pressed it flat against her chest like something fragile and alive. I got my answer late, she said. But I got it. Not everyone does. I know that now. In June, almost a year after the salt flats, we finally moved into the ranch house together. Officially. My mother helped us unpack, laughing about curtains, while my father repaired a fence without being asked twice. Priya flew in for the weekend, declaring the ranch disgustingly romantic, and immediately asking about horses. Standing on the porch that first night, Jordan took my hand, the same way she had on the trail months earlier. A year ago I was checking your pulse on a stretcher, she said. Now I'm checking it because I love you. I laughed through unexpected tears, realizing how far both of us had traveled since that white, blinding afternoon. We didn't get engaged that night. Not yet. But we planted a small garden behind the house together. Felt like a quieter, more permanent promise than any ring could have offered either of us right then. My mother started attending a local support group for parents, quietly working through decades of buried regret about Renee. She sent me a photo one afternoon of herself smiling at a support group picnic. Captioned simply, "Proud of you both." Kyle visited that summer and helped Jordan mend fences, coming home sunburned and oddly talkative about found family. Even Marcus sent a short, kind message wishing us well, closing an old chapter neither of us needed anymore. By August, a full year after my collapse, I no longer flinched when strangers assumed we were married already. We hosted our first Thanksgiving at the ranch that fall, my parents and Jordan's aunt seated at the same table. My mother raised a toast to second chances, her eyes finding mine across the table, steady and certain. That night, after everyone left, Jordan and I sat on the porch steps under a sky full of stars. "Do you ever think about how close you came to not waking up out there?" she asked quietly. "Every day," I said. "It's the reason I stopped sleepwalking through everything else in my life." She pulled a small velvet box from her jacket pocket, hands steadier than I expected them to be. "I'm not asking because I'm scared of losing you anymore," she said. "I'm asking because I finally know I won't." I said yes before she even finished the question, laughing and crying at the same time, the way honest joy sometimes arrives. We got married the following spring in the salt flats themselves, under an open sky, surrounded by everyone who mattered. My mother walked me partway down the aisle, Renee's old photograph tucked quietly inside her jacket pocket. Somewhere in all that slow repair, I realized the desert hadn't almost taken my life. It had actually begun it. A year and a half after nearly collapsing on the Bonneville salt flats, I stood there again, married, unafraid, and finally, fully myself. Jordan squeezed my hand as the sun set gold across the salt, and I understood that being saved was only the beginning. Staying was the real rescue. Then